Hello everyone, my name is Stuart Harmon. I'm a partner at Oliver Wight Asia Pacific, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Today's presentation is called The Missing Link in Integrated Business Planning, Integrated Tactical Planning. Many companies that have embarked on an integrated business planning implementation still find senior managers being dragged into short-term tactical issues and problem solving. Despite putting considerable effort and energy into executing their plans, many still struggle with poor customer service, high costs, high inventories, and frustrated employees. While integrated business planning, or IBP as it's commonly known, is highly effective in aiding planning over a 4 to 24 or 4 to 36 month horizon, giving visibility right down to EBIT or profitability projections, it was never designed to control the execution of those plans within the 1 to 3 month tactical horizon. This is the role of integrated tactical planning. Unless plans are properly managed and coordinated during this time period, execution is problematic. Constant last-minute changes and firefighting, poor service, high costs, and employee frustration plague the business. Today, during this webinar, we will explore what a lack of coordination processes can mean for your business, and how having the planning and execution processes linked and running in parallel across a monthly cycle can significantly improve your results. Following today's presentation, we'll have a question and answer segment where today's speakers will answer individual questions submitted by members of the audience. While listening to today's presentation, I encourage everyone to submit questions at any time by typing in the comments section on your screen. Remember that today's webinar will also be available on demand, so you can view it again at your convenience or share it with friends and colleagues. You'll receive an email with a link to access the webinar within the next few days. Now, I'd like to introduce myself and welcome today's speakers, Rod Hozak and Todd Ferguson. Speaking for me, I'm based in Sydney, Australia, and spent 20 years working in key change agent roles in major manufacturing organisations around the world. Since 2004, I've worked with Oliver Wight, helping organisations improve and link processes across their organisations and supply chains to improve business outcomes and enable the successful deployment of strategy. I have specialist expertise in strategy management, integrated business planning, purchasing, and Agile Lean Sigma. My colleague Rod Hozak is based in Sydney, Australia as well. Rod has 15 years hands-on experience in the pharmaceutical industry and nearly 20 years consulting to match, driving successful business improvement programs with large blue-chip organisations, including Abbott Laboratories, British American Tobacco, Caterpillar, and Fonterra, helping these companies on their journey to Class A business excellence. An accomplished strategist, Rod has a proven record of effective implementations that deliver tremendous value for his clients. My other colleague, Todd Ferguson, is an Oliver Wight principal based in the US. Todd is a demand management expert, and as a consultant and educator, he assists companies with overcoming supply chain challenges and implementing solutions with a concentration in the disciplines of demand management and integrated business planning. His subject knowledge spans a range of industries, including consumer packaged goods, fashion and apparel, heavy industry, and chemical. Current clients include Huntsman Chemical, Cargill, Bridgestone, General Electric, and Tiffany. Todd has held positions in sales and marketing, order fulfillment, demand planning, and demand control. He is the lead instructor of the Oliver Wight Public Demand Management classes in the Americas, and he holds a BA in economics from the University of British Columbia. Todd, Rod, and myself have authored many publications. A few are depicted on the screen here. To get a full list of these, go to the Oliver Wight website, where you'll find a range of topics authored by a range of our Oliver Wight associates who are all experienced and hands-on practitioners. There's a wealth of information there, so it's all free. I'd really encourage you to go and have a look and download some if you haven't done so already. So let's look at today's agenda. So over the course of the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to cover the following topics. We'll give you a quick overview of Oliver Wight. We'll then give you an overview of the integrated tactical planning methodology. We'll then dive a little deeper into the key elements of integrated tactical planning, the aggregate versus detailed planning, the weekly process, and the roles and responsibilities. We'll give you a brief case study and talk about some of the benefits that you can accrue from implementing integrated tactical planning. And finally, we'll have a live question and answer discussion. We'll take as many of your questions as we are able to in the allotted time. So we'll quickly just wanted to give you a brief overview of Oliver Wight. I know many of you on the call know us, but there's some of you who are new to Oliver Wight, so just thought it'd be worthwhile to give you some background. Our firm is a thought leader that's been around for nearly 50 years. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary next year. We're a global firm founded in 1969 by Oliver Wight. We have worked with a whole host of Fortune 500 organizations, household names, including Caterpillar, Merck, Procter & Gamble. We've done global implementations that include Abbott Laboratories International, DuPont, Avon, General Mills, to name a few. Currently, we have 63 principals working for our organization. We're all experienced practitioners with Class A credentials, deployed as teams to maximize the results for our clients. Everyone who works for Oliver Wight comes in with typically 15 to 20 years experience as a minimum of working in industry. We don't have any graduates straight out of college doing the pretty work. Everyone that you meet at Oliver Wight has a wealth of experience to offer. Oliver Wight himself, who's pictured on the screen, along with Joe Orlick, invented MRP, and Ollie went on to pioneer its use in industry and build many more practices that are commonplace today. MRP2, SNOP, IBP, demand planning, CPFR, all processes that have been originated or pioneered by the Oliver Wight organization. We work across multiple industries, cross-industry, and we've got significant experience in complex planning process implementations. Our methods and best practices have been proven over time, and we have a real focus on ensuring that our clients implement and get the benefit from sustainable process improvement. That's a mark of success for us, is that the processes we help you put in place stick around and provide value for a long period of time. Now, I'd like to hand over to Rod Hozak, who's going to take us through the first section. Enjoy the webinar, everybody.
Thanks, Stuart, and hello, everyone. To fully appreciate the role and value of integrated tactical planning process, we need to start with the integrated business model, which covers core and support processes and virtually every element of running a successful business. At the center is strategy, business plan, and performance, which all other activities in a business should align to. As the cliche goes, however, the only constant is change, and hence, by definition, plans are going to be constantly changing. So therefore, it goes that there needs to be a mechanism to effectively predict, manage, and replan those continual changes, and have a framework around that realigns the trajectory back to the company's strategic goals. Highlighted in the dark or black oval there on your screen is the integrated business planning process, which is a monthly aggregate business planning process designed to continually realign plans back to strategy and business plans. And as Stuart mentioned, it's not designed to manage the detail. The integrated business planning process and is often referred to as the process that operationalizes strategy. And this is where we believe the lead team should live most of the time. And by live, I mean looking out for the next 24 months and spending their time on ensuring everything is lined up to meet strategy. In the best environments, I've often referred to this as the lead team living in the future. Below the red line on your screen indicates a different set of processes from the aggregate integrated business planning process, which is often referred to, naturally enough, as below the line, to indicate this is where the detailed planning and execution processes occur. Feedback from senior executives, however, has been consistent in that the notion of living in the future is easier said than done, and they get continually dragged back into the here and now. This is the space where integrated tactical planning should reside, and while we will describe it in more detail in the rest of this webinar, the key characteristic of integrated tactical planning is that it is a weekly replanning process owned by the next level of management and designed to focus on delivering the first 3 months of the integrated business planning process plans, or otherwise communicate and escalate if that's not going to be the case. As an aside, this is a key behavioural characteristic that needs to be encouraged, and that is it's better to have bad news early than it is to have bad news late, which we see quite often in organisations. So the next slide we're going to move on is to look at where we should focus our time. If we can just have the next slide. While that's coming up, here it is. So with regard to how time should be allocated, on your screen there's a breakup of how time should be spent in the integrated business planning process and the integrated tactical planning process. The ambition should be for the integrated business planning process to spend 75% of the time on months 4 to 24, with a little bit of time on past performance to make sure there is the confidence in that the plans we have promised in the past are being delivered, and a quick check-in on how the next 3 months are going. And remembering that those next 3 months will be replanned through the integrated tactical planning process. And note I said have been rebalanced. It's past tense, because in a good integrated tactical planning environment, any imbalances or serious issues with meeting the integrated business planning process plans should have already been addressed before the monthly reviews, and hence are just that, a check-in. So hopefully you can now start to see the importance of the integrated tactical planning process. It's charged with spending 75% of the time focusing on delivering the next 3 months of the integrated business planning process plans, and is typically done at a more detailed or granular level. Remember, integrated business planning is an aggregate business planning process, and the information viewed should be at least in weekly buckets. But depending on the horizon and the type of industry, it could actually be in daily buckets for the near term. This next level of management needs to be authorised to resolve issues, rebalance the demand, supply and product plans back to the integrated business planning process plans for the next 3 months. And if they go outside their predefined and pre-agreed authority levels, communicate early. As mentioned previously, bad news early is better than bad news late. This is also not just about rebalancing to the end of the month, which is a typical driver we see in businesses. It's about replanning out to the planning time fence, which is typically 13 weeks. We don't have time to go into how to validate that the 13-week horizon is right for you, but suffice to say that in most organisations, when we do an analysis of the critical decision points, it results in a horizon somewhere between 10 and 16 weeks. And so 13 weeks or 3 months is a good starting point. Also, in organisations doing this really well, the 13-week bottom-up plan becomes the first 3 months of the integrated business planning process plans as each monthly cycle comes around. So read that as there's no disconnected overrides coming in every month from the monthly process to change the weekly plans. So let's have a look at the rationale behind integrated tactical planning in more detail. In setting the scene here, the first observation I'd like to make is that there are no organisation I know of who have more resources than they need. Therefore, having senior executives involved in the tactical horizon and crisis management is a waste of business resource. And if anyone has an organisation that have more resources than they need, can I come work for you? But it's not usually the case. The flow, therefore, from strategy and decisions around replanning in the longer term need to occur at every level in the organisation and be aligned. The monthly integrated business planning process therefore aligns up to the business and strategic plans for the next 24 months and directs downward to what's going to happen in the next 3 months. The weekly integrated tactical planning process sits in between and aligns upward to the integrated business planning process and directs down to the more detailed plans for the next 13 weeks. To quote from the Rockefeller philosophy, their third fundamental principle that they argue must be mastered is a thing called driving execution, which states that you need to establish an effective daily, weekly, monthly rhythm to keep everyone in the loop. The outcome is those companies who pulse faster, grow faster. The watch out, however, is that some people push back with comments such as, process discipline inhibits my flexibility and my creativity. But as the author Vern Harnish argues, that this kind of discipline or routine actually sets you free and gives you more time to make better and faster decisions. So let's have a look at some of the symptoms that show a lack of integrity in the integrated tactical planning space. These are some of our observations, and they are: the executive continually dragged into the tactical issues. The management business review or the monthly lead team meeting is focused on the short term, and for example, it might only be just the next month and sometimes next quarter. There's an inability to predict end-of-year position with confidence, even with only a couple of months to go, as one of my clients routinely highlights. Plans keep changing and surprises arise almost every week, sometimes daily. Costs and inventory continue to rise, even with effort being put into keeping them contained. Customer delivery performance is continually taking hits. Purchasing are ignoring the system because nothing makes sense to them at the lead time they need to place purchase orders and order things, and there are likely to be invalid run rates for key resources and overly optimistic capability planning. And what else do you see in your business? Probably a bit of firefighting as well. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on the call. I'll hand back over to Stuart for another polling question, and I'll be back in a few minutes.
Thanks, Rod. So we've just opened the poll. You should see that on your screen. And we just want to pose a question to everyone, to give us a bit of feedback as to how much time is spent on the past and the next 3 months in your integrated business planning process. So just waiting for the screen to move forward. So if you spend less than 30% of your time focused on the past and the next 3 months in IBP, then please choose A. If it's between 30 and 50%, please choose B. If it's higher than that, please go C or D. We've got some results coming through at the moment, so just give everyone a few minutes for a few more seconds to give us that feedback. These things are great. You can always see them coming in real time. So thank you for participating. Right, so that's really interesting. We're seeing there that 23% of or 26% of respondents say, we're only spending less than 30% of our time focusing on the next 3 months in IBP. Significant number though saying between 50 to 79%, nearly half of the respondents there, and that's interesting. That it's almost identical to a survey we conducted in Asia Pacific with over 100 C-suite executives a couple of years ago. So if you've scored that around sort of a C or a D, it's I suppose comforting to know you're not alone. This does, however, demonstrate why the focus has started to swing back to making sure that the next level of management have a formal and disciplined approach to managing the shorter term. That's, as Rod explained, the next 3 months. So let's have a look at how integrated tactical planning works. And as we go through the conceptual framework, I encourage you to start thinking about how the process might work for your business or businesses. So I'm going to pass over to Todd now to take us through the next section.
Great, thanks, Stuart. So Rod had mentioned about the scarcity of resources, and I just want to begin with an observation around that. We rarely work with or have ever worked with an organization that's had more resources than they need. Typically, resources are scarce and need to be carefully managed. So it's therefore imperative to align these levels of processes, which you'll see here on this slide, with roles and specific authorizations to make sure that indeed we're focused on the right level in the business, and more importantly, making the right decision at the right time over the appropriate horizon. So as we work with clients, we often look for how well the multiple layers of business processes, as articulated in this slide, are integrated and defined, and most importantly, connected. And these layers are really, from our perspective, composed of a couple different layers. In this first layer, the top row, this refers to the annual business and strategic planning processes. So as we build that view on this slide here, you'll see that this is the focus of the monthly integrated business planning cycle. And at the very top involves senior members of the business. This is where the senior team should be focusing the medium to long term, continually replanning and realigning back to the 3-year business plan and strategy. And it should be done at an aggregate level, not daily or weekly at this level, but more monthly buckets. The focus here is clearly, as Rod took us through the integrated business model, line of strategy, 4 to 24, 36 months or even longer. And as he'd mentioned, living in the future. And what does this mean? A couple thoughts. One is anticipate and manage issues well before they become today's problems. And I think also being prepared for the inherent uncertainty that trying to accurately predict the future brings. So running simulations on possible variations of plans and being prepared for those variations with contingencies becomes very important. I'm going to keep talking here, looking through the slides here. It's disappeared on my screen. So the next piece here is the weekly replanning process that includes demand and supply planners, for example, that form the next level of management. They also need to take ownership of delivering the integrated business planning plans. That's done by prorating the monthly core plans into weekly buckets and managing a rolling 13-week horizon with the intent of, and this is the most important aspect of ITP, ensuring plans are created at the aggregate in IBP and are being executed. And lastly, there's also senior management, which is meant to live in the future with the planning functions and middle management to live in the next quarter and in turn drive the agenda for scheduling daily execution. They close the loop on planning, replanning, and communication. These are the daily execution activities that are highly transactional in nature, linked to ERP systems, for example, that may also include customer service and other roles. So as we think about the focus of integrated tactical planning, it's really to bridge the planning activities with execution activities. It's also designed to ensure that those who are tasked with being strategic, for example, business leaders, they aren't drawn into the weeks of tactical decisions. A formal tactical planning process delivers superior performance through improved role clarity, communication, effective decision-making at the right level in the organization over the appropriate time planning horizon. Okay, so when done well, integration across several layers in the organization becomes more routine. Next slide, please. Great. So as we've discussed, the integrated planning process is designed to stay focused on delivering the 2 to 3 year business plan and strategy, the IBP process. And if at any point in the process there's a departure from those approved plans, they need to be balanced and rebalanced within the defined authorization levels. This becomes the foundation for setting the escalation criteria. It's a way to reinforce what we in Oliver Wight say, science is approval. And so just like the title of the slide reinforces, in other words, if I'm a senior executive and I don't hear from you, then I'm going to assume everything is still on track. But as we permeate through the different layers of the organization, again, at a different level of granularity over a different time horizon, the second reference with multiple arrows, now kind of penetrating further down, again, more execution type activities, reinforce that there's effectively a closed loop system that's designed and accommodates and has to focus on continual replanning, planning and replanning from the detail back up to the aggregate and back down again. So this loop again continues just as we described it, and the intent is that nothing can really escape or leak from the process. It helps to ensure all levels of plans stay congruent, we're on track, and we would say one set of plans and numbers so that the entire organization understands the marching orders and that we follow that, and we do follow that until it's formally replanned. We have a plan until we change it. If that's tomorrow, next week, or next month, depending on the process level. So as we've defined the process, gone from aggregate to detailed planning, the difference between the horizons as it relates to integrated business planning and tactical planning, let's talk about who's involved in integrated tactical planning. So let's look at some of the key roles as we've defined them and also as we've worked with clients. Quorum, by the way, is the minimum number of people that we think would be part of this, but it can vary by your organization or how you're functionally organized or your structure. So just a perspective here in terms of some of the key roles. There are 4 key roles that drive integrated tactical planning. So the first one is around the demand management role. We begin there, or demand controller. And this role is to make sure they're monitoring changes to the demand plan, either the deliberate request for change from the field or monitoring daily orders versus the forecast. But the main point is that they are conduit by which all demand changes are captured and managed, and really, from our perspective, communicated. Often overlooked, but very, very important, the formal communication stream. So the days of account managers going straight to the supply planner to influence what is on the schedule or on order really are gone, and they're removed. The second big role, the supply planner or supply scheduler. And again, this is the kind of counter to the demand manager, the alter ego. And the role is to make sure the supply planning, or the replanning process rather, meets the new demand plan or change request, and we do so in a cost-effective manner. So the liaise with the supply side, orchestrating any changes to the plan. The role can be referred to as a master supply planner. The key point here is it's a deliberate title to acknowledge that the supply plan drives all other supply plans. It's the master plan. As we think about how these 2 roles work together, they're both focused on changes. So requests for changes to demand and implications for supply, who is often tasked with ensuring a cost-effective response. Then we work around the rest of the actual diagram to say customer service, for example, is also a key role. Order entry and promising function resides within customer service, typically, and is there to represent the customer policy in the execution of any agreed changes. This role, we find, could be highly transactional, but it's very, very important. And insights can be gathered, for example, that came through the IBP process, and now we have understanding of how orders are taken, how they're promised and fulfilled. So regardless of SKU rankings or priorities or allocation policies, they're often a very, very pivotal player. And then finally, as another one of the core plans, the product plan, often underestimated, underutilized in our opinion, and a huge opportunity for clients who actually implement integrated tactical planning is the formal integration of the product voice, product input. And this could be a product planning manager or coordinator. It's not just about launching new products, it's also about managing the execution of the product management plans, new products, product trials. Poorly managed in our experience can be effectively more in control, including phase out of SKUs. So just a little bit about the quorum, some of the typical roles, and it could be a group of people doing more than one role, but don't think of them as people, just think of them as roles, and it could depend upon the size of the company, okay? So how might this look from a weekly cadence perspective? I'd like to turn it back over to my colleague, Rod.
Thanks, Todd. While this webinar is primarily focused on the monthly to weekly integrated business planning to integrated tactical planning processes, it's important to understand that there needs to be a connection and realignment happening right down to what happens daily, and in some circumstances hourly, for monitoring and executing of the plans. In this case, daily action may be to monitor sales, tested against the tolerances and alerts that we may have set up in the system, as well as track how those sales are progressing to meet the weekly forecast. And this would include routine communication with the sales team, determine whether action is needed, read that as changing the plan, and then potentially liaising with the supply team to determine feasibility of those change requests. However, at least once a week, we need to stop, check, and replan the next 13 weeks, which would include an analysis of sales variance to forecast by week, assessment of the impact on the next 13 weeks, gaining approval for any changes to forecasts that may result from this analysis and discussion, and bring in the sales organisation to validate the doability of the new plan. Then that then culminates in the weekly integrated tactical planning meeting. Now, to be able to do this well, we need to define the cadence of activities more precisely. So defining the work to a the process to a formal cadence. And the weekly rhythm is critical. Typically, the process definition goes quite granular in timing, for example, to the day, but often the morning, what needs to be done in the morning, the afternoon, and even sometimes down to the hour to ensure all the elements of this tactical replanning process line up seamlessly. This becomes even more critical when considering doing a blueprint for software support. We'd always encourage you, once the process is in place, encourage software support to make it work less clunkily than in many spreadsheets. In this simple version on your screen, the rollover each week needs to firstly identify changes to the product management execution plan and any potential impact on the new plan out to the planning time fence. As Todd mentioned, this is why a product planning manager or coordinator is an important member of the quorum. Their mantra is to ensure the product plan stays on track and doesn't get bumped when changes occur. Secondly, identify the demand variances from last week's forecast versus actual sales and the impact on the new plan out to the planning time fence. The demand execution manager plays a pivotal role in not only bringing the demand variance analysis and the potential impact on the next 13 weeks to the meeting, they also bring key insights around why and where changes occurred. Thirdly, the assessment of the impact on the master supply plan and its weekly role and potential mismatch of capacity or capabilities through running rough cut capacity planning on critical resources. Lastly, we need to ensure that the approvals are formally signed off and communicated, which then allows the last part, which is the meeting part, to occur. So think of this first part as analysis and replanning, and then leading up to the weekly ITP meeting, we need to allow enough time to share the plan, and the plan needs to have visibility of how we tracked against last week's plan, how we're progressing to the integrated business planning plans, and give people time to digest what has changed and the impact on the stakeholders' environment. The next step is to prepare for and run the weekly integrated tactical planning meeting, usually made up of the quorum and key stakeholders in delivering those new plans. And the outcome of that is to be able to sign off the doability of the plan. And of course, we need to communicate the plans to others after that's finished, and then the process starts again. That's why it needs a very tight cadence and definition around how to do it. In large organisations, as Todd mentioned earlier, there may be several integrated tactical planning processes and meetings running in parallel. It depends, however, on the structure, size and complexity of a business. But a few examples we have show that integrated tactical planning process can range from a one company-wide process, i.e. one process, one meeting, to having several parallel market category focused processes, as may be the case in a large fast-moving consumer goods business, to one being structured along the lines of global channels or routes to market, which it might be typical in a large global food industry. If we could have the next slide. So what does the agenda look like? As I mentioned earlier, the integration of the monthly to weekly to daily is an important outcome of good business management. The meeting cadence then becomes the heartbeat of the organisation, which is designed to act as the communication rhythm to move information through the organisation accurately and quickly at the right level of granularity and over the right horizon. We like to keep the agendas as simple as possible so that we don't lose ourselves in too much detail. And in this case, the weekly integrated planning agenda essentially has 5 sections based on the core plans of product, demand, supply, and customer management. And an example agenda is on your screen. But the essential questions that are being asked and answered in the review, in the meeting are, how did we do last week? How are we doing this week? And out to the firm zone, which is usually the next 1, 2, sometimes 3 weeks. Are we capable of doing the new plan out to the 13-week horizon, which is usually assessed using rough cut capacity planning or capability planning by week? Are we still on track to meet the monthly integrated business planning process, a key element which often gets overlooked, so that's an important one to answer. And what actions and or decisions do we need from others? And of course, good meeting etiquette says we should also table up front any new key issues that we need to focus on this week. We should close the loop towards the end of the meeting by summarising and agreeing key actions, decisions, and escalations, and always critique not only the process, but people and behaviour, data integrity, and technical capability. So I'm going to hand back over to Stuart. We have another polling question for you.
Thanks, Rod. So we've got the poll open. So Rod and Todd really have explained a formal process, and a number of you might be listening to this, looking at the slides, thinking, well, we do some of this, but our question is, how formally do you do it? So our question now is, do you have a formal communication process to review the impact of changes in the near term and align on the actions needed to deliver the integrated business planning plans? So if you do, let's go for A. If you don't, go for B. We'll give you a few seconds just to give us some feedback, and then we'll keep moving. So just waiting for a few more people to vote here. So at the moment it's 2 to 1 coming through. That 2/3 of you have responded as saying you don't have anything formal in place. Good to see that 1/3 of you say that yes you do. That's heartening. Very much our experience is the more formality you can put into this, it has to be practical, however, but the more formality you have around process, the better outcomes that you're going to get. So let's see if we can move on with the presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Todd now, and we'll talk about some of the benefits that you can get through implementing integrated tactical planning. An example from a client that's had quite a lot of success in this area.
Great. Thanks, Stuart. So as we think about the quick wins, I'd like to share with you, and we're very excited to talk through a case example. So as we positioned the content here, some of it may be very theoretical. We want to share with you actually, once the client starts implementing it, what could they expect? So let's talk through a real case. And just for context, perhaps some background. So this was an example of a multi-billion-dollar company, had roughly 1,500 employees, primarily operated in the food manufacturing, consumer goods, grocery channel with very short shelf life products. They had several categories, about a dozen, 8 manufacturing sites, and many routes to market beyond the grocery channel. Had implemented SAP in a hurry, things like service, default inventory, and even product obsolescence were growing. And integrated business planning process at that time was not in good shape. So the CEO, who'd been there for quite a few years, about 17 years, shared the following insight. And it was around, he didn't really know how we got here. In fact, I think that was part of the quote, is I don't know how to get out of it. And also, by the way, I'm retiring in 6 months. Can you help us fix it by then? So our answer was no, but we sure can make some significant gains by then. And we did. And we wanted to share some of the activities and the route to how you could start achieving those gains. But in short, data integrity, capacity, the monthly planning process around IBP extending out to 24 months became very, very paramount, became critical, and how we tighten the strategic planning process alignment and more. But the thing that made the most difference in the shortest amount of time was really the implementation of a formally integrated tactical planning process. So let's talk through some of the key steps in line with the Oliver Wight proven path, but given the sense of urgency and purpose, to use the weekly cadence of integrated tactical planning to get some very quick wins. So let's talk through these key steps. The first one is around a pilot. Many of you who've gone through process implementations in terms of identifying and really trying to land on where do we start, the concept of a pilot may not be new. For this client, it certainly was the direction they needed to help trace the flow of product and information from customers to order entry and promising back through distribution and manufacturing, purchasing, and even their key suppliers. Every step, every form, every system and data point in SAP and Excel to think about parameters, the formal, informal stuff people do to make a broken process work. Mapped it out, put it on a wall so everyone could visualize it end to end. Brought people together to really understand what it is we need to look at as a starting point. So the pilot, in terms of scope, became very important. Next, needed to define and agree to the planning time fence. So Rod took us through the cumulative lead time and the planning time fence and why that's critical. And it can vary from product to product in your own companies today. You may say that could be 6 weeks, 14 weeks, or even longer or shorter. The most important thing is to define that as a team. It could be collaborative between demand, sales, and supply chain. But we want to identify the cumulative lead time from placing the order. The interesting thing here is for the longest lead time critical material to having a finished product ready to ship, they could vary. In this case, it was anywhere between 9 and 14 weeks, again, depending on the product group. The key glitch was master supply planning was really only being done for a couple weeks out. And the question that became, who is managing, weeks 3 to 13? So there was a lot of shrugs and perhaps some silence and even some glares. But I think the consensus was that's why a lot of people in purchasing, for example, are pulling their hair out. And they actually thought this was normal behavior. So we had to define what those were for the organization and work with them to make sure we were aligned. Third thing is to focus that pilot group of product around some critical resources, and then test the quorum of people. So as we think about initially the supply planner and the behaviors and also demand, but the supply planner represented both supply and product planning. But as we talked about before in our quorum, as we went through that slide, the need for separate roles, may be 1 or 2 different types of roles managed by not the same number of people. But the idea there is they have different voices and views and inputs. And by the way, we had assumptions that came through our integrated business planning process that are very critical related to products, new products, innovation, life cycles. That view needs to be represented when things change. So having that view, the coordinator role, was very, very critical. And that completed the quorum for that category. We also focused on getting a demonstrated capacity, capability process up and running quickly. These plans were based upon some semblance of reality, not aspirations, not a budget, but actual reality. Needed to agree that key data supported good planning. So as we think about this, what are we saying? Inventory record accuracy as a starting point was clearly an opportunity. Bills of material, and you can think about your own organizations when you think about data integrity, the breadth and depth. The work center data, other kinds of information. Again, we're still in pilot mode, doesn't have to be perfect. Roughly right principles could apply, but we need to get our arms around and really harness the scope and the magnitude of the issues supporting key data and what the opportunity was if we actually got that in good shape. And lastly, I'd just say for process integrity, we agreed and started measuring by week, small number of key metrics, DIFOT, distribution, manufacturing schedules, supplier delivery performance to understand the health of that mini supply chain. As we work with clients, some of the common questions we get is where to start. And the answer is clearly it does depend. Your pilot may be a segmentation or stratification of items by ABC methodology. It could be by key customer. And your metrics may be something that you do today you just want to leverage, but articulate and surface and communicate more broadly so that people really understand some of the root causes and also that we're driving the right kind of change. So just in perspective, on a real life case example, and you can also see graphically some of the results and improvement. So let's transition to the next slide here, where we can talk a bit more about some of the other improvements. There's the case fill that we talked about here, and also trend by week over time. I'd say, aside from fill service, another benefit is the impact on inventory. In this case, dropped by 10% in volume, but 38% in value, which was significant, indicating they were focusing on the right inventory, and their obsolescence value declined in both age and quality by an overall 23%. So they went on to get all the process and data metrics performing at greater than 95%, and running 5 local category integrated tactical planning processes, including one for export. So it would be good to explore how the integrated tactical planning process might be structured for your business. Do you have one process or many parallel processes, as in the case study? But we have come to an end on our presentation today, so that might have to be the subject of another webinar. We just want to share with you some of the quick wins, again, through this case study, and also based upon our experience, a place to start, and also how you might socialize and also communicate some of those wins as you stand up and improve your process. So what I'd like to do is say on behalf of Rod, Stuart, and myself, I'd like to thank you for spending some time with us today. I hope you got some value out of this brief exposure to integrated tactical planning. We do have some time for questions, so I'll hand back to Stuart as our moderator, and hopefully we can address all your questions before we sign off for the day. So Stuart, let me turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Todd. That's really good. So we've got a little bit of time, as Todd said, for questions. So if you have a question, please type away in the box on your screen. We would also like to offer you the opportunity for a complimentary 1-hour telephone conversation to discuss how you might apply integrated tactical planning in your organisation or your current needs. Let us know if you're interested in this. We're going to send out a post-webinar survey. If you're interested in some education, I would like to come along to one of our workshops. We're running an integrated tactical planning workshop in Melbourne in Australia on the 7th and 8th of November. We are also planning to run one in the US during the first quarter of the 2019 calendar year. I'd also encourage you to go to the Oliver Wight website, either the global website or the regional website in your region. As I said earlier, there's many resources there, information on courses, white papers and case studies that are free to download, and also webcasts. As I said earlier, we will make this recording available for you if you want to revisit or share with any of your friends and colleagues. So let's have a look at, I've got a couple of questions that have come in. So I've got one here. I might pass over to Rod. Rod, question here: what's the difference between the firm zone and the planning time fence?
Thanks, Stuart. We talked a lot about the planning time fence, which the starting point is from the time you release a purchase order for raw materials or in a supply chain environment, finished goods to be shipped from overseas or wherever it may be, to the time that you have a finished product ready to sell or ship out of your own premises. The firm zone, however, is a shorter period of time. So in a manufacturing environment, it might be how quickly can I cycle back and make the same product cost effectively, or in a supply chain or finished goods environment, it would be how often am I getting delivery of a product. And that essentially is, if you break into that firm zone, it's actually going to cost a lot of money and cause a lot of disruption. So the planning time fence is often put in the system to make sure the planner is formally planning, managing the changes, where the firm zone is typically something that we just know we don't change the schedule in the short term because it's going to cause massive disruption.
Thanks, Rod. I've got another one here. In forecasting, we encourage unconstrained forecast. However, in the tactical planning, we are firming up a time fence. Isn't this contradictory? Rod or Todd, either of you want to take that one?
So just to be clear here, so I think they said in the integrated business planning process, we are encouraging unconstrained forecasting. Is that right,
Yeah.
Stuart?
Yeah.
And the question then becomes, in the tactical horizon, then we are actually assuming that that plan is a plan of record, right? And is the question that is that contradictory?
Yeah, yeah. We're firming up against the time fence. So isn't this contradictory behaviour?
Yeah, good question. Let me share a perspective. So I was working with a client that had a very robust and a very active demand planning department with several forecasters, and they were measuring their forecast accuracy at different lags, offsets. And when we discovered what the kind of activity was and the reasons for that, it's to really understand, for example, the impact of changing forecasts within certain time frames. But the cumulative lead time and the relative point in time in which they're measuring those forecasts were much different. The cumulative lead time is how fast is the longest critical lead item, right, that you can actually, that it takes. So the planning time fence in that case was 13 weeks. So when they were measuring at 5 weeks, it was really not so much value added as it was to say we had a plan. Now what's the process that we have to put in place to deal with variations in demand versus reforecasting? And I would argue that there's always going to be techniques such as demand sensing and other capabilities that systems or software can offer you. But managing and sensing orders is much different than having people reforecast or replan inside a zone that's very much not frozen but very firm. The entire process of tactical planning is to define those time fences, the relative costs and changes when we do make changes, but not simply to lean upon a forecasting technique by itself. It's to communicate effectively changes in demand and a process to make sure we're aligned with supply chain versus really forecasting again or reforecasting. And there's quite a big difference. So just a perspective, and when we talk about forecasting, I think we need to be clear about the changes that we're willing to accept, the relative costs, and also that it should be lined up with those planning time fences and trading zones and also those firm zones.
Great, thanks Todd. Another question I've got here, you talked about computers there, and you know, the presentations talked about process required and some of the people you need to operate the process. What about tool support? What about computer systems? Are there any specific computer systems that are designed to support integrated tactical planning? Rod, is that one that I can pass over to you?
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want me to answer that one?
Yes,
look, the answer is at the center of an ERP system, we've got some really good tools to give us the base data, such as a master supply planning process, statistical forecasting, etc., that can come together and give us the base data. The challenge I have in many of the environments is that it's driven primarily from spreadsheets, and a lot of it can be data holding spreadsheets that I'd be looking to, one, make sure that the base data and the integrity of that base data is held in your ERP system, and then explore, and I won't go and name some of the systems out there, but there are a lot of systems that give you manipulative and display capabilities that automate the process. And I'd encourage us, once we've designed it, so to speak, in Excel, then to be looking at streamlining and automating in one of the newer online systems that just take the clunkiness and the potential for misalignment of data out of the equation.
Great, thanks, Rod. So just coming back to the previous question, we've got an addition to that. So Todd, I might throw this one over to you. Thanks for coming back with this one, HX. So in your opinion, do you recommend a frozen time fence in tactical planning, or a robust forecast that accepts continual forecast changes within a short lead time, such as within the 3-month or 12-week horizon?
Yeah, great question. What we recommend is defining those time fences. So the first step in tactical planning as an input, which is really a part of a good best practice integrated supply chain and also process, and also part of good supply planning, in collaboration with the sales or the commercial organization, we would define time fences, the planning time fence, for example, the cumulative lead time, also some firm potential or trading zone time fences, but we wouldn't say frozen. we would say we need to define those time fences for the relative cost and the magnitude and the ability to respond to customer demand in this case, for example. So there's two parts to your question. One is recommend a frozen time fence. I would say firm, not frozen. If you think about this, even in 2 to 3 weeks, in some industries we've worked, there may be a relatively higher cost of meeting that demand, but you may also look at it as an opportunistic demand, and there could be a relatively higher price you could charge to meet that demand that your competitor could not service or chooses not to service. So we have to be clear about firm versus frozen as the best practice. In terms of accepting continual forecast changes, we would always encourage the latest, greatest information, but how we manage that information can vary. What we put into the system to drive requirements through a formal demand plan or forecast versus communicating that through, if it's very near term, to minimize noise, confusion, and misalignment. And so that's how I would characterize that. It's an excellent question, but I think there's two parts to your question, and I think we need to think about the implications of change and develop a process to effectively communicate when change happens inside the execution window in most companies.
Great, thanks very much, Todd. Great response. We've got time for one last question, which I might throw over to Rod. So thank you, Joseph, for posing this one. So you're asking, what if the problem is not DIFOT performance, in brackets high inventory, but production conformance to plan? What are some of the actions you suggest to address this?
Thanks, Joseph. Good to see you online. This one comes up often in that as long as my DIFOT is okay, therefore everything else is okay. And while DIFOT's important, obviously you're asking the question because you see that there's an issue there. We often will, and it could be an integrated tactical planning, depending on the size of the organization, but line up the supply, what we call the roll-through yield supply chain nodes. So typically in a manufacturing organization, it would be our DIFOT as the endpoint, our distribution plan performance, our finished goods production performance, our subcomponent or semi-finished goods performance, and our supplier delivery performance. And if you multiply the performance of each of those process outcomes, and for a simple one, those 5 steps, if I use 95% performance as a good indicator and multiply those through, you still come up with a supply chain effectiveness of 77%. If any of those performances drive down to 80 or below, it'll drop dramatically. So the health of the supply chain, while it's still hitting DIFOT, we still have waste in our process for getting there. And that may be rework, just in case inventory, suppliers who are constantly, their lead times being violated, etc. But there will be a cost there that I would start to explore as a, how can I say, a root cause of the supply chain health being low.
Great, thank you, Rod. Well, look, thanks everybody. That concludes our webinar for today. If you have more questions, if you want more information, please reach out and contact us. We'll give you full information on how to do that when we send through the post-webinar survey. So just leaves me to thank you all for attending. I'd like to thank Rod and Todd for giving us their insights today. So look out for the email. There'll also be a link to the webinar on demand, so you can listen at your leisure. And have a great day wherever you are in the world. Thanks very much.
Thanks everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks everyone.